Few people know that on the morning of June 6th, 1944, as Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, dozens of dogs were already there, jumping into chaos before many humans ever touched the sand. The cold waters of the English Channel slapped against the landing craft. Inside, packed shoulder to shoulder, men gripped their rifles, and beside them, tails wagged nervously, dogs wearing gas masks, small packs of explosives, and even parachutes. They weren't mascots or pets. They were trained soldiers, assigned names, ranks, and missions. A young paratrooper from the 13th Battalion would later write in his diary, "When the ramp dropped, I didn't see men move. First I saw Bing leap into the surf, barking against the gunfire." The story of Bing, Ricky, Caesar, and other dogs of D-Day is one of quiet heroism, a story rarely told, overshadowed by tanks and generals. But these dogs were among the first to land on the beaches, the first to crawl under barbed wire, and the first to sense mines before men stepped on them. Their mission was simple but deadly: locate mines, carry messages, calm terrified soldiers, and sometimes run straight into danger, knowing they might not come back. Imagine the chaos of that morning, the air thick with smoke, the sand shaking with explosions, men shouting and half-heard orders through the roar of artillery, and amid it all, dogs sprinting across open sand, ignoring fear, following only their handlers' voices. Private Walter Capper recalled, "My dog, Caesar, didn't flinch. He ran ahead of us through a field we thought was mined. He saved 20 men that morning." To these handlers, their dogs weren't equipment. They were brothers in arms, trained for months in secret camps across England. These animals learned to sniff out the faint metallic scent of danger, to crawl low under gunfire, to stay still even when mortars landed nearby. They trained for D-Day without knowing what it meant, but when the ramp dropped, they ran first. As Allied planners prepared for Operation Overlord, they realized no human could move as silently, as fearlessly, or as loyally as a well-trained war dog. So they gave them missions suited for the impossible mine detection on Omaha and Gold Beaches, messenger runs between units under fire, and even morale duties among the wounded. But behind every bark was a heartbeat trembling with fear. The handlers knew it too. They would often whisper the same words before a landing. "If I don't make it, find someone else to follow." Boy, some dogs never returned. Some were buried on the beaches they helped to clear. But others like Bing and Jet would live long after the war, honored for their bravery, awarded medals, and remembered in quiet museums across Britain and France. Still, most of their stories faded into the tide unrecorded, unsung, forgotten. Today, when we think of D-Day, we imagine men, tanks, and landing craft. But between them were paw prints that marked the line between death and survival. And so this is their story. The story of the first Paws on Normandy's beaches, and the silent heroes who charged into history without ever understanding the word war. Before the roar of artillery echoed across Normandy, the war dogs of D-Day were already veterans of another kind of battle, the one fought in the quiet fields of Britain. Months before the invasion, the British War Dog Training School in Hertfordshire and U.S. K9 centers across England were alive with the sounds of barking, shouting, and discipline. These were not pets anymore. They were being shaped into soldiers. Each morning began before dawn. Trainers, often soldiers themselves, led German shepherds, collies, and Labradors through obstacle courses that mimicked the chaos of war. Explosions were simulated with blanks. Mud was everywhere. The smell of cordite filled the air. A single command could mean life or death. They were trained to crawl under barbed wire, to freeze when they smelled gunpowder, and to detect the metallic tang of mines buried beneath damp soil. Some learned to carry messages in waterproof pouches tied to their collars. Others learned to locate wounded soldiers in total darkness, guided only by a faint scent of blood or sweat. Private James Allen, a dog handler who trained in Surrey, later wrote, "We were told to trust our dogs more than we trusted our rifles. A rifle can jam. A dog never hesitates." Every dog had its own story before the uniform. Many were family pets donated by civilians through the War Dogs for Victory campaign. A collie named Ricky had once been a farm companion before being trained to detect mines. A small mongrel called Judy had survived shipwreck and imprisonment, with sailors in the Far East before earning her place among the honored. Each had a number, a file, and a purpose. The handlers were taught not just to command, but to bond. They ate together, slept side by side, and trusted each other in every drill. Some even shared their rations when supplies ran low. It was said that a good dog could sense fear before its handler spoke a word. That unspoken link became their greatest weapon. By May 1944, as Operation Overlord approached, the dogs were divided into units. Mine detection dogs for the engineers and infantry, messenger dogs for airborne and commando units, casualty dogs to locate the wounded among rubble and craters. Each group had its own training camp. Each had a handler sworn never to abandon his animal. In a secluded coastal village in Devon, a group of Royal Engineers ran rehearsals on mock beaches. There, being a German Shepherd mix, learned to jump from landing craft into the surf, dragging his handler through waist-deep water while ignoring simulated explosions. The first few attempts failed. Bing panicked at the sound of machine guns, but his handler, Lance Corporal Ken Bailey, refused to give up. He would sit beside Bing every night, feeding him bits of bread and whispering softly, "It's just noise. Mate, just noise." By the third week, Bing no longer flinched. He had become what the soldiers called bomb-proof. Across the Atlantic, American trainers at Fort Robinson and Camp Rimini had spent years perfecting similar methods. When U.S. forces arrived in Britain, they brought their own canine corps, over 3,000 dogs ready for deployment. Together, the Allied war dogs formed a silent battalion, one that would never appear on official rosters, but whose impact would echo through every battlefield. In the final weeks before D-Day, handlers received sealed envelopes with their assignments. Some would parachute into Normandy with their dogs. Others would land on the beaches. Most didn't know where they were going, only that they would go together. The night before June 6th, as troops prepared for embarkation, the dogs lay quietly beside their handlers in makeshift camps along the southern English coast. A single spotlight swept over rows of men and animals. The air smelled of salt and diesel. Private Walter Capper recalled. "Caesar rested his head on my boot. He didn't know we were crossing to France, but he knew something was coming. I could feel it in the way he breathed, steady, ready." At dawn, the handlers loaded their dogs onto landing craft. The waves were rough. The men joked nervously, tightening their life vests, adjusting the dogs' harnesses. Some tied small white bandages to their dogs' collars, a makeshift symbol of luck. When the crafts began to move, the handlers could see the horizon flash with the first shells. That was the beginning of D-Day, and for these dogs, the end of training. They had been prepared for the impossible. Now, they were about to prove what courage looks like when it walks on four legs. June 6th, 1944 dawn, the sea boiled with steel and fire. Hundreds of landing craft surged toward the beaches of Normandy, each packed with men and a few with dogs. In the gray light, Bing stood at the edge of the ramp, trembling, but not from fear. The engine's roar, the smell of salt, the cries of gulls all mixed with something deeper, something alive. Behind him, his handler, Lance Corporal Ken Bailey, whispered, "Good boy, just like we trained." Then the ramp dropped. The first thing Bing saw was chaos smoke, bullets slicing the air, waves painted red. Men stumbled into the water. Others disappeared beneath it. Without hesitation, Bing leapt. The cold hit like a wall. He paddled hard, his harness tugging at Bailey's grip. Tracers zipped above the waterline. The beach seemed an eternity away, but he never looked back. On another craft heading toward Gold Beach, Private Walter Capper clutched the leash of his dog, Caesar, a powerful German Shepherd trained for mine detection. When the order came to land, Caesar pulled forward with surprising force. As if he understood, he hit the sand first nose low, tail rigid, ignoring the shells bursting nearby. Walter followed, shouting commands drowned by the thunder of gunfire. Caesar darted ahead, sniffing furiously, and then stopped frozen. He pawed the ground twice. Walter shouted to the engineers, "Here, he's got one." They dug fast. Beneath a few inches of sand lay a German Teller mine armed, waiting. Caesar had found it before anyone stepped on it. Moments later, another explosion erupted nearby, but that one wasn't theirs. Across the beaches, more dogs were landing, messenger dogs, casualty dogs, even paratrooper dogs who had dropped behind enemy lines hours earlier. Some were disoriented, others wounded, but most pressed on. A small black collie named Ricky, barely 30 pounds, worked beside a British sapper team clearing minefields. Every few steps, he would pause, nose twitching, then scratch the earth. That morning alone, Ricky found 12 mines. Later, a shell landed close, burying him in sand and debris. When the soldiers dug him out, coughing and trembling, Ricky simply shook off the dust and went back to work. For that act, he would later receive the Dickin Medal, the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross. But courage came at a price. Not every dog made it through. On Omaha Beach, an American unit tried to release its messenger dog under heavy fire. The surf was too deep, the current too strong. The animal vanished into the waves before reaching shore. The handler collapsed in tears a moment unnoticed amid the battle's roar. War is merciless, even to the innocent. Still, for every loss, there was a miracle. At Juno Beach, a paratrooper named Corporal Roy Humphrey was hit in the leg by shrapnel. Pinned down, bleeding, he sent his dog, Jet, to carry a message back to command. Jet sprinted through open fire, leaping over barbed wire and fallen men. He returned 30 minutes later with medics following close behind. Humphrey lived. By midday, the beaches were littered with craters and wreckage, but small paw prints traced through the mud, weaving between destroyed tanks and bodies. These dogs worked tirelessly, following invisible trails of scent that no man could see. To the soldiers, it was a strange comfort. In a place where everything screamed of death, a single bark meant life, a mine found, a man rescued, a message delivered. Private Allen later recalled, "When you saw a dog running through that hell, you remembered what courage really looked like." As the tide rose, the handlers regrouped behind the dunes. Many were wounded, some missing, but the dogs still paced, restless, eager to keep working. They didn't understand victory or defeat. They only understood duty. Bailey crouched beside Bing, brushing sand from his fur. Both were trembling, but alive. In the distance, the roar of Allied tanks grew louder. The beaches were secured. For the dogs, the battle wasn't over. They would spend the next days clearing minefields, sniffing through wreckage, and comforting wounded soldiers in field hospitals. Their presence alone, a warm nose, a steady breath, brought men back from despair. In a war built on machines and destruction, it was these living, loyal creatures that reminded soldiers of something human, hope. And when night fell over Normandy, the beaches finally grew silent. Among the twisted metal and endless graves, small figures curled beside their handlers, exhausted, covered in soot and salt. They didn't know what they had done that day, but history would remember them the first to leap, the first to land, and the last to leave the field. By the third day of the invasion, the beaches of Normandy had become a graveyard of metal and silence. The guns still thundered inland, but on the coast, men were clearing the remnants' mines, shells, and traps left behind by retreating Germans. Among them was Bing, the German shepherd, who had leapt first into the water days before. He was exhausted, his paws raw and bleeding from hours of work. Yet he pressed on, nose low, ears twitching at every faint click beneath the sand. His handler, Lance Corporal Ken Bailey, followed carefully, keeping the leash loose. The engineers trusted Bing more than their instruments. Now he had already found a dozen mines since the landing. That morning, near a stretch of dune south of Gold Beach, Bing suddenly froze. His entire body stiffened. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Bailey stopped instantly. He knew that sound, the warning before danger. The area looked ordinary, just sand, seaweed, and a few scattered helmets, but Bing refused to move. He began pawing the ground softly, then looked back at Bailey with sharp, urgent eyes. Bailey dropped to his knees, brushing away sand with trembling hands. There, half buried, was a thin metal wire nearly invisible leading toward a rusted artillery shell, buried deeper beneath the dune. It wasn't a single mine, it was a booby trap. A whole anti-tank shell rigged to explode with the first step of a man or a shovel. Bailey froze. One wrong move and they'd both vanish. He whispered, "Easy. Bing. Stay." The dog obeyed, motionless. Sweat dripped from Bailey's helmet as he carefully traced the wire's path with his fingertips. Behind them, a small unit of engineers waited, watching the scene unfold. One of them whispered, "Bloody hell, that dog just saved us." Bailey's voice cracked through the wind. "Everyone back. There's more under here." They retreated slowly as he marked the spot with a red flag. Moments later, the disposal team arrived, and what they uncovered stunned them all. Hidden under the sand were 3 interconnected mines wired to the same shell, a chain trap meant to take out an entire squad. Had Bing taken one more step forward, none of them would have walked away. When the detonation team finished neutralizing the device, Bailey knelt and hugged Bing tight. His hands were shaking. He whispered, "Good boy. You just saved 20 lives." The soldiers nearby clapped and cheered, a rare sound of joy amid the wreckage. One officer wrote in his report that day, "The dog's instinct and training prevented certain casualties. Exceptional performance. That single act would later earn Bing the Dickin Medal, the highest honor awarded to animals in wartime, engraved with the words, 'For gallantry.'" But for Bailey, no medal could capture what it meant to see his companion face death without fear. Elsewhere, similar stories unfolded in silence. On Omaha Beach, Caesar and his handler continued clearing minefields for days without rest. When Caesar was wounded by shrapnel, he refused evacuation. He limped forward, still searching, until his handler finally carried him off the line. On Juno Beach, Ricky, the small collie who had survived being buried alive, led engineers through a mined orchard. His light frame allowed him to move safely where men could not. That day, he cleared a path for an entire platoon of soldiers who would later capture a German position untouched and far inland. Among the paratroopers, Jet the Black Labrador saved countless wounded men by finding them in the ruins of Normandy's villages, barking softly until medics arrived. Each story echoed the same truth, that courage wears many shapes, and sometimes it walks on 4 legs. That night, as the sun sank behind the shattered coastline, Bailey sat beside Bing near the dunes. The wind carried the smell of gunpowder and seaweed. In the distance, artillery still flashed like lightning. Bing rested his head on Bailey's lap. The man's uniform was torn, his hands black with soot, but his eyes were calm for the first time in days. He whispered, almost to himself, "You were the first to land, and you'll be the last to leave." "Hey, boy," Bing wagged his tail weakly. No words were needed. Both had survived something neither could truly understand, the madness of war, the thin line between loyalty and sacrifice. By the end of June 1944, most of the beaches had been secured. But even as victory approached, the war dogs continued to serve clearing roads, sniffing out traps, guiding medics, and comforting the wounded. Their work rarely made headlines. There were no parades for them, no speeches, no grand ceremonies, only the quiet gratitude of men who lived because of them. And in that silence, between the crash of waves and the whisper of wind over Normandy's sands, their legacy remained unseen, but unforgettable. When the guns finally fell silent over Normandy, the world exhaled. The beaches that once screamed with chaos now echoed with gulls and waves. But among the ruins, where rusted helmets lay half-buried in sand, something else remained, faint paw prints fading with each tide. The war dogs had done their duty. They had crossed the same beaches as men, faced the same fire, and saved lives in ways no machine ever could. Yet when the war ended, most of them returned to silence, their names absent from the records, their medals gathering dust in forgotten drawers. Bing, the German shepherd, who had stopped the deadly trap on Gold Beach, was one of the lucky few. He returned to England with his handler, Ken Bailey. At a small ceremony in 1947, he received the Dickin Medal, hung gently around his neck as the crowd applauded. But Bing didn't understand the cheers. He only wagged his tail, searching the crowd for the man whose voice he trusted more than any sound in the world. After the war, he lived peacefully on a farm, his battle scars hidden beneath a soft coat and quiet eyes. Ricky, the tiny collie who had survived explosions and buried mines, went home to his original family, an old farmer and his wife. They said he was never quite the same. Whenever thunder rolled across the hills, Ricky would stand at attention, waiting for a command that would never come. He was still a soldier, even in peace. Jet, the black Labrador who found the wounded in Normandy's fields, continued his service in London, helping rescue crews search for survivors during post-war bomb demolitions. He too received the Dickin Medal for his unwavering bravery. His handler once said, he never looked for praise, only for the next life to save. But for many, there was no return. Hundreds of war dogs were left behind, lost in the confusion of post-invasion operations. Some were adopted by the soldiers they'd served beside. Others buried quietly near the beaches they helped to clear. Their names are unknown, but their impact lingers in every story told by the men who lived because of them. Private Walter Capper, Caesar's handler, once wrote in a letter to his wife, he wasn't just a dog. He was courage with fur. When everyone else hesitated, he moved forward. That's what saved us. That single line, scribbled on yellowed paper, became the only memorial Caesar ever received. In the decades that followed, historians spoke of generals and tanks, of strategy and victory. But the soldiers who were there remembered something else. The warmth of a dog's breath on a cold morning, the calm of those steady eyes amid the madness, the reminder that even in war, loyalty and love could still exist. Today, at the Imperial War Museum in London, a small glass case displays a faded harness, a dog tag stamped Bing, and a black and white photo of a soldier kneeling beside his canine partner on a Normandy dune. Visitors pass by quickly, often unaware that they're looking at one of the quietest heroes of D-Day. No grand speeches, no medals on display walls, just silence and memory. As one veteran said at a reunion decades later, when we stormed those beaches, we thought we were the brave ones. But when I saw that dog run into gunfire, I realized courage doesn't always stand on two legs. The war dogs didn't fight for glory. They didn't understand strategy, politics, or history. They only knew trust the voice of their handler, the command to move forward, and the instinct to protect. And in that simple, selfless act, they taught humanity something profound. That bravery isn't about strength, but about loyalty in the face of fear. As the tides of Normandy continue to wash away the footprints of that day, the stories of Bing, Ricky, Caesar, and Jet remain whispered among veterans, preserved in archives, immortalized in hearts. They were not just tools of war. They were living souls who carried messages, found the lost, and saved the broken. They were the first to leap, and often the last to leave. So when history speaks of D-Day, remember this. The first soldiers to set foot on Normandy's sands did not all wear boots. Some wore Paws. The war dogs of D-Day didn't ask for medals. They didn't choose to be heroes, but in their loyalty and courage, they reminded the world that even in humanity's darkest hour, light can come from the simplest hearts. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, not for glory, but for gratitude, then help keep their memory alive. Like this video if their courage moved you. Subscribe to hear more untold stories of the Second World War, the kind history books forget, but hearts remember. And most of all, share your thoughts below. Would you have trusted a dog with your life, like these soldiers did? Each comment, each share, keeps these names Bing, Ricky, Caesar, Jet from fading into silence. Because history isn't just written in battles and victories. It's written in loyalty, in friendship, and in every act of courage that never made the front page. The men of Normandy had courage, but some of the first heroes on those beaches had Paws. If you listen closely, the waves still carry their stories.